Hi there. The Dungeon Master Roundtable you're about to watch is just one of a few topics that were covered during a live stream session hosted on the Dicely DnD Twitch channel, and the music you'll hear in this video was created by Tabletop Audio. And now I'll let our guests introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Fred Wheeler. I run the How to D&D YouTube channel. You'll find that I do mostly Dungeons and Dragons, but a lot of 5e stuff as well, a lot of instructional stuff, and I am on Twitter, Facebook, Discord if you actually want to talk to me in person. And I run Light Hall classes now. Would you believe it? I actually teaching it online. Taken me 5 years, but yeah, that's me.
How's it going? No fun allowed. And contrary to my name, I sometimes allow fun. I typically cover such things as running your tabletop role-playing games and running modules and things of that nature.
Alex. I am the Bear Bard, or Alex, is but normal people call me. I run Bear Bard Tales. We cover TTRPG stories from all over the sphere, mainly horror stories because that's what people want to hear, but we try to throw some glory stories in there and stuff and try to take, I guess, lessons from that. I try to add in a couple tips here and there with there, but a lot of narration stuff within the space.
Hey, I go by Flutes on the internet, but governments and principalities call me Jordan. You can call me either. And I'm part of the Flutes Loot YouTube channel along with my wife, which branched out of our website, flutesloot.com, which has 200-something articles about different D&D and TTRPG subjects. And I'm happy to be here, though a little tongue-tied.
Hey there everybody, this is AJ Pickett. I am a full-time YouTuber that makes lore videos on Dungeons & Dragons and particularly monster ecology in a particularly easy listening and very thorough style with a lot of research put into them, so check it out.
Hi there, my name is Anthony Soul. I'm on the Play Dicely YouTube channel most of the time. Other times, I'm a professional dungeon master. You can find my services at fiverr.com/AnthonyTheDM.
So the first question I've got for you guys today is kind of a philosophical one in a way, I guess. So a defining feature of tabletop role-playing games is allowing the players to make decisions. But depending on the situation, those decisions can be trivial or they can be meaningful. So, in your opinion, what are meaningful decisions? How can we add weight to the decisions our players get to make? And perhaps we'll start with Anthony. Do you want to take the first answer at this?
Sure, why not?
Welcome to the DM's Roundtable, Anthony.
Welcome. All right, so a meaningful decision to me is something that affects the kind of rolling plot of the story, that long thread of narrative that we as the DM weave with the help of the characters, of course, driving it forward. And I think the way that we give weight to those starts before the game even begins rather. It starts with like that character backstory and how you as the DM weave it into the world. And then once in the game, I think a meaningful decision to have weight means that you as the DM have an open mind and you maintain what I believe to be probably one of the most important mindsets of running any kind of TTRPG game or kind of collaborative storytelling exercise in general, which is just nothing is precious. So whatever you've created, it doesn't matter if the characters have a better way of pushing it forward.
Interesting. We'll move on to AJ and we'll continue around clockwise.
So a meaningful decision would be something that has a purpose or a function within the game, or that has a significance. So it could be a significance to the player in relation to the character. One of the best ways I've seen that this is used is when the DM asks for a skill check, and they do it in a narrative fashion that takes a part of the character's backstory and expands on it, and expands on how that character learned that and what NPCs in the game are related to that knowledge and that legacy of that character. So this is particularly important for new players to the game who are not very comfortable or confident in bringing NPCs and stuff from their character's backstory into the campaign, or making use of them and stuff. So it's kind of your job as the dungeon master to look at what the character, the player has intended with their character, steer them away from murder hobo characters that are divorced from all connection to the campaign world, and immerse their character into the campaign world so that their decisions have impact and purpose and have repercussions and progress their character's development and story arc. But also there's a heavy emotional element in that too, where you're all of a sudden a simple skill roll is now a narrative focus on that character that player gets to have fun and play, and role play and really immerse themselves, and the character comes in more into focus and more connection to them emotionally, because they're immersing themselves and thinking about that character as if they had a past and stuff, and they think about their character's childhood, adolescence, training and stuff, and it starts to snap into focus.
I think I agree with everyone so far, and I'll probably agree with everyone that comes after, but I will try to add something a little separate from what's already been said, and a little bit of a hot take, honestly, and I'll let you decide what the hot take is. So let's look at like the mechanics of the game as well. If a character choice that the player makes is, I want to be this class, this subclass, and I want to specialize in XYZ, and you don't really set them up to succeed with those things, then their mechanical choices and how they built their character are not meaningful to them, and there's no way that they're probably going to feel satisfied with their character choices going forward. They might just want to die and make a new character. Who knows? But the thing about this is, some people say things like, I'll allow your character to do this, or allow everyone to do XYZ because it just makes sense. But they do so not knowing that there's a certain subclass that can already do that, and if you allow everyone to do that, then anyone who would have played that subclass is like, well, why would I do that if the point of playing it would be nullified? Not only that, because a lot of people often say, well, if that subclass isn't in your party, it doesn't matter, so you can just throw that out because you're not nullifying a subclass if no one's playing it. But if you play regularly with the same group of people, they're going to assume a lot of those rules are going to carry over, and they might say, well, I don't want to play that kind of character because I know it's going to be nullified by just the way we play the game. And so there's a lot of different possibilities that go into that, and so I think a bit of the hot take is, I think DMs really need to know what the character options are so that they can enrich each of them without nullifying any of them, especially if you're in a repeat group. Otherwise, you're going to confuse people and be inconsistent. And I think that's a great way to encourage meaningful character build decisions while still having room to make them shine. Like, you can also know when a certain character choice is, like, knowingly suboptimal, let's say, or weaker than other choices they could have made. You can kind of set them up to make what makes that subclass or that character choice special and enhance it instead of just leaving it as is. So there's a lot that goes into that, and I don't hear people talk about that very much. So I thought I'd kind of go against the usual, if it's not in the party, just who cares, you know, because I care. So that's at least one person does. So that's my answer.
Also, I feel like I should invite the round table here. If somebody says something that really sparks you to want to kind of engage what they've just said, feel free to hop in after somebody's done. Otherwise, I'll pass it on to Alex.
Just start interrupting everyone. No, at this point. So not to sound like a freshman philosophy major, but it's kind of what you make it. And a lot of it's going to be where, specifically talk about like there, Flute was just talking about it, that in character creation and how you take that. The way I kind of attacked it is who makes a meaningful decision in, because we have different campaigns, and it's going to be anything that makes a long lasting change. And so if you're in a more on rails, and I know that's always a bad thing, but if you're on a more on rails campaign, anything that changes a character long term, or even like an NPC that you could bring back, but it's going to be a long-term change, something that's going to affect either that character or another character for the rest of the campaign. But you keep it on rails, so there's certain things that still happen. If you're talking about a more wide open campaign, something that affects the world, look at like Fallout 3. You could blow up a town, so then the town's gone forever. Something like that, where something that really, the characters decide to help that beggar, in the level 1 thing. Well, maybe that has a lasting effect. Maybe you're like, that's how you kind of like, you just now set the tone. Oh, they helped them? Cool, that's what they're going to be. Maybe something comes back around because they made this decision. They didn't maybe realize it was meaningful, but you make it meaningful. Or they don't, they spit in his face, oh, you filthy beggar. Cool, well, now you just set the tone. That's a meaningful decision. It's something that you're going to now build around them and that group and that party, again, for the rest of the campaign they're doing.
If I can jump in real quick, something that Alex and Anthony both said, and AJ a little bit too, it seems like a lot of times we focus on meaningful decisions being like a long-term effect. But sometimes it could be like very short or even micro decisions, like how much they talk to an NPC. I've been in games where I try to talk to an NPC and the DM kind of gives like short answers. It's almost like trying to approach a girl at a dance when she doesn't want to dance with you, and she just gives like brief answers, like take a hint. That's what the NPCs feel like sometimes. Like they just like default don't like you and they don't talk as much because they're like not important. And so the DM doesn't really encourage you to interact with NPCs because that one NPC the DM didn't care about. And so even those micro moments, you can set up your players to enjoy every aspect of the game, whatever they choose to interact with, as opposed to just kind of shutting down like, oh, okay, I guess there's just certain NPCs the DM wants to use and I'll just wait till those show up and then I'll engage, so there's the macro and the micro moments that are meaningful.
Sure. And that kind of like preparation obviously takes a lot of time to make every single NPC fleshed out, so to speak. But at the end of the day, you're running a game for people because, either they're paying you or they're your best friends and you want them to have a good time. So either way, put in some effort,
I like that your first reason was they're paying you.
Well, usually for me, that is why I'm running a game, so...
Well, everybody's paying you in their time as well.
True.
True.
That's true.
Head on over to Trevor.
So for me, meaningful choice or meaningful decisions are questions that can be answered. Why does the enemy units have laser rifles? Well, that's because you didn't stop the caravan. Why is the king helping us out? Well, that's because you saved the prince a few years back. Having those meaningful decisions is questions on why something is happening and immediately answered because of the player's decisions or maybe possibly their indecisions. And, which technically is a decision, oxymoron, whatever the case may be, right? But making your players understand why something is going on. Why do I take damage? Well, that's because you were stupid, right? It can be as simple as that. And it's important that your players understand why things can happen, especially if there is a discernible reason.
So you're saying it's got more to do with logical consistency in your game world and expanding on the game world lore. That like direct meaning as it applies to the game itself.
I mean, in the most Oxford way, I guess.
To piggyback on that, I've been really pleased when I create a sense of urgency, and I think that kind of feeds into what you're saying, Trevor, where there are machinations in the world that happen if the players choose to not do things, like the example you gave of, they didn't stop a caravan, and so now their enemies have better weaponry. When I ran Curse of Strahd, one of the best compliments I got from players was they said that it felt alive because they felt like whatever they chose to do, they would affect, and whatever they chose not to do would also have its own effects that are going on. And that really stuck with me that they liked that. And so that's one way to make their choices feel meaningful, is it's not like just everything is on freeze, like kind of like a Skyrim quest they'll just sit out in the wilderness and wait for you to go into the dungeon. Like, oh hey, you're here. Like 3 months later, you know. I think that feeds into what you're saying.
And Fred.
Well, Anthony summed up a lot of what I was going to say. So I've been sitting here writing down notes, trying to figure out what I'm supposed to say next.
Yoinked it from your brain.
Yeah, no, not really. I think it just comes down to just letting players do stuff like anything, and not being attached to the storyline, whether it be at the beginning, the end, or the middle. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Asking them what they want to do, and you talked about it being done during session 0, which is always a good time because it helps you prep and plan as a dungeon master, but you can keep asking those questions as you're in the campaign, so you can keep updating that, particularly if you have the time. If you don't have the time, obviously you won't do that, but I've found that I can handle that myself. I don't know that necessarily everybody's going to be able to do that as we're running through a campaign, but I think that's helpful. Not being attached to your main villains and your monsters, so that if the players have made the choice that they are going to take somebody out, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So I think that has helped. You know, you may have to sort of, I mean, they're replaceable, right? You know, monsters and villains can be replaced. You can just put something else in there, really. So not being attached to that. One of the things that I've found that has been really helpful in the campaigns that I've run is I gave one of my groups a flying ship. And when you give them a vehicle, like the ability to be able to travel anywhere they like. The worst thing you can do is run a Star Wars saga campaign, which I've done, and they decide to travel to any planet in the Star Wars universe, because, I mean, that is totally outside of anybody's realm. But it's a little bit different with something like the Dungeons and Dragons world, because, right, faster light travel. Just remember, Star Wars, problem. But Spelljammer, you can slow things down, right? Things can happen along the way. So vehicles are really useful. I found that really helps them feel like they have control over what's going on, and the choices and the decisions that they are making with their character really are meaningful. Recently, I ran a campaign where they captured a castle and they got hold of Tresdar Manor in Dragon of Ice by Peak, and they decided to upgrade the manor, do it up, and make it their base. And then, of course, the dragon in that adventure wound up in the lobby stuffed. But so those are sorts of decisions where suddenly they have control. They are affecting the landscape and the structures around there. They're creating their own home. They're not always going back and sitting in an inn or a tavern and something like that. I mean, that's a decision, but I feel like that sort of makes them feel much more comfortable with where they are. And I think another example is the town they were in, Phandalin, is kind of broken down, and they made the decision, well, we're going to upgrade it. And I'm like, okay, all right. So I'm not exactly sure how to do that, but I had somebody in the group who he does the quantity surveying for building houses and so forth. And he said, it's all right, Fred. It's all right. I can handle this. And so he did all the work and just handed me the data. And I was like, sweet. So they really felt like at the end of that they had a huge impact, and the decisions they made changed the world around them. They weren't just traveling in it and being pushed around by other forces.
Yeah, and it's always a great thing when you have like just people with very specific expertise at the table where they can just find enjoyment in city planning in your game. It's always great to surround yourself with people of different experience. I think basically at this point, anything I'm going to be able to say is summarizing what everybody else has kind of touched on at this point. But I think for me, all of what you have said is valid and meaningful decisions. Another one I would like to just highlight is meaningful decisions to me are also choices that make the players feel conflicted. You know, coming to the correct choice isn't easy, and that the correct answer might not be same for the whole party. And these are the kind of decisions that will have players asking themselves about the kind of person they think their character is. These kind of introspection types of decisions. And I think everybody's touched on all of these, but ways to add weight, understanding the goals of the player characters. Like Fred was saying, if you can keep up with the players and their goals, that makes it so much better. Ensure, I think this is an important one. Ensure the players know at least some of the consequences of making one choice or the other in these like big pivotal decision-making opportunities. Having the choice be personally relevant, of course, is an easy one to kind of pinpoint. And, I believe it was Flutes that mentioned add a deadline. That'll make huge impact on a decision. But with making decisions that might kind of create a schism in the party, there is an art to it, of course, because you'll create tension, but hopefully it's between the characters and not the players at your table. But conflict creates interesting story. And a decision that is difficult, causing internal conflict, creates moments where characters learn about themselves. And that is one of my favorite things, is seeing characters develop and go, oh gosh, I am that kind of person, or I would never do that. Like making those absolutes. And then later seeing that they would totally do that thing they said they'd never do. It's always great to just, break characters, see characters do things, and just constantly develop. Yeah. Anything...
Hearing you talk about this, Denny, is really funny considering all the threads that you've pulled in our game so far. Just like, oh yeah, I see where you got that, and that, and that.
Yeah, you're getting a bit of insight into my DMing style. Yeah, so did anybody else have anything they wanted to touch on before we move on from this topic?
Just one thing. I have had in the past an incident where in earlier editions alignment was a lot more restrictive and important for your character's mechanics. And sometimes that would be, particularly if you're at a group of a table where there's a lot of mechanics focused players, which is fine, got no problem with that. They can teach you some very good combos with feats and stuff, and at the same time I'm teaching them about being a thespian. But when that became a meaningful and conflicted difference between us was where they all jumped through a portal of evil and my character went, no, I can't. My character would not do that because he's good and he will not do an evil thing. It's kind of the opposite of the excuse my character would do that. And that got me a lot of flack at the table because I just didn't put that aside. I said, no, that's very important for my character. That's my character's alignment is very meaningful for me, much more meaningful than a mechanical aspect. So in that regard, it was a DM's failure in that part because he was catering too much to the others and forgot that would be a massive roadblock for my character. So it was something that we discussed after the game, and avoided problems like that in the future.
Mm-hmm. I find it greatly appreciative nowadays that kind of morality is less on the mechanic side and more about, the individual and the storytelling and the thespianness, as you so put it. Yeah, it nowadays in a situation like that, it's kind of more of the if the party breaks up into sides in a situation like that, it's like find the way to say yes so that the story goes on, but then a character might deal with like the ramifications of kind of bending to the will of something they normally wouldn't do. All right.
Yeah, I think alignment's a fun one to kind of play with because I know a lot of people. There's obviously a huge argument for anti-alignment. Oh, alignment's dumb. I hate it. It's so. But I think it's a fun thing to use because I think it should be fluid to a degree because characters grow. So maybe a character that starts off one way grows into or devolves into something else. And so I like to play with that. Like I had a group. I was in this group actually. I was DMing a group and my brother was in it. And he made his character good, and he starts. I'm not going to say he was murder hoboing, but he wasn't, being great. And I'm like, okay, cool, you can do it. But then I tell him afterwards, I'm like, okay, but remember this is your alignment, and it changed, and I'll change their alignment for them based off their actions. And like, I'm not saying there's like consequences for it or anything like that, as far as like. There may or may not. I don't know. It kind of depends, especially like if they're like a cleric or something like that. They're a cleric of a lawful good god and they're, acting like a prick. then there's going to be consequences when that comes. But just to use it as like a metric where there is that kind of consequence where, you're not who you thought you were. You're changing. You're not, that you're kind of developing that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, alignment definitely has a place, and it's unfortunate that it's tough to work mechanically, but it's a great thing for people to fall back on to help influence their characters. And that brings us to the end of this topic of meaningful discussions that we had during this live stream. Be sure to let us know in the comments below what your thoughts on meaningful decisions and what role they play in your tabletop role-playing games. And be sure to check out all the YouTube channels of all the guests that were present here. You can find links for their channels down in the description below. And until next time, may you always play Dicely.